Welcome to MMA Al Dente. Today I'm going to be talking about one of the greatest runs in MMA history, also the UFC history. This is, it's not on par with like Shogun's 2005 run or whatever, or fucking any current run. But for where it took place and how it took place, I consider it one of the greatest streaks that a fighter's ever put on, just constantly overachieving. And this is Amir Sadollah, his Ultimate Fighter run in 2007. Now, or was it 8? I think it might have been 8. 8. The Ultimate Fighter, they're all exhibition fights, so these fights don't count as pro fights. And Amir Sadollah entered the Ultimate Fighter with 0 pro fights anyway. So he had 0 pro fights until he made his UFC debut. Everything you see on his record is in the UFC. And that record is 6-5. That's his MMA record and UFC record. He's one of those guys like Matt Riddle, who was on the same season, ironically, where it was all UFC fights. Now, Amir Sadollah enters the competition, like I said, with 0 fights. There are plenty of experienced fighters there, but only one guy has UFC experience. And he's the guy that's matched up with Amir in the preliminary portion of the, elimination process. Meaning these guys are fighting to get into the house. Obviously, Amir wins, but it's a very close fight, kind of grueling, tough to watch. It's a grueling grappling match, very sloppy, but Amir attempted a few arm bars and eventually got one in the second round. That begins the greatest run, one of the greatest runs I've ever seen from a fighter, of constantly overachieving. He moves on to the Ultimate Fighter house, and his first matchup is against Gerald Harris, who is a monster wrestler who can pick up just about anybody in that division and toss them on their head. And he's fighting Gerald Harris, who's, again, a much more seasoned fighter. And Amir is primarily a striker. That's what he's known as, is the Muay Thai guy. That's his reputation in the house. Of course, he got an armbar to get into the house, but still, this looks like a very bad matchup for him. He's not going to be able to get his Muay Thai off. He's going to get slammed around, and for a large part of the fight, that's what happens. And then, just as they cross over the halfway point of the fight, in the middle of the second round, Amir, out of nowhere, just puts a knee up against the cage. He's up against the cage, puts a knee up against Gerald Harris's chin and knocks him out. Knocks him out cold. Amir wins a huge upset after getting tossed around. It was a big comeback, getting tossed around by Gerald Harris, who was mini Rampage. Rampage was his coach, and he was looking like mini Rampage in training and in fighting, really, if you watch him fight. Go watch his fight with David Branch, which is no doubt his biggest victory, but which would take place in the UFC. Anyway, huge win for Amir Sadollah. Looks like a fluke, but it's an upset and a comeback. And when I say looks like a fluke, I'm not trying to say it was a fluke. I'm saying it looked that way to me when I was watching it. And then when you watch the guy constantly, my point of this video here is every fight of his was a comeback and an upset. And you can't call those flukes. You can't dismiss them. It's like Darren Elkins. That's why he's one of my favorite fighters. Darren Elkins gets his ass kicked and comes back and wins. Nobody's going to say, oh, he got lucky, it's a fluke. They're going to say, that's Elkins. That's what he does. So Amir Sadollah moves on to the, the quarterfinals, I guess, at this point. The quarterfinals, and he's fighting Matt Brown, who's on his team. They're teammates. Matt Brown has a shitty record. I think it's 6-7, but he's regarded as a very underrated 6-7. A really good fighter, one of the best in the house. All the guys respected him, and not just because he carries himself like fucking John Wayne, but they respected him. And Matt Brown is known as the biggest savage in the house, and everybody knows these two are going to go to war. It is a war. I want to say it's the only fight in which Amir is not behind. It's the only fight that isn't a comeback, but it's still a war, and it's an upset. and Amir Sadollah gets it done via triangle choke in round 2. It was a tooth and nail war. The only reason I'd say Amir was ahead is because he hurt Matt Brown visibly and audibly. Matt Brown screamed after Amir hit him with a knee to the body, I think. And it was just an awesome fight. A fight that would have gotten fight of the night on that season, and certainly in the UFC house. In the UFC. Forget about the Ultimate Fighter house. But it was an excellent fight, and that moves Amir on to the semifinals. Now, the semifinals is it's matched up with Amir fighting CB Dalloway and Tim Crador on the other side fighting Jesse JT Money. What the fuck was his last name? Jesse Taylor. And Amir is fighting the toughest guy in the house, CB Dalloway. He's got a record at this point of 5-0. Maybe it's up to like 8-0 after what he's done in the Ultimate Fighter house. But, Amir is a very big underdog. This is the best guy on the show. And, at the time anyway. And Amir gets his ass kicked, gets thoroughly out-wrestled, and smashed on the ground for 2.5 rounds. And with a few minutes left in the fight, maybe 2 minutes, I don't know, Amir catches him in an armbar. It's a beautiful armbar against the cage. Amir pivots his hips, kicks off the cage, gets enough leverage on that arm, just kind of catches it on like a beautiful angle and holds it tight till he falls back and CB taps. One of the greatest fucking comebacks I've ever seen. It's one of the greatest upsets I've ever seen. And for it to happen with a guy who had comebacks and upsets all throughout the season, it's probably my favorite episode of The Ultimate Fighter ever. It is. It's one of the coolest fights I've ever seen. The guy with 0 fights, the Muay Thai guy who's, clearly he's got grappling, but he's not the grappler of CB Dalloway's caliber. And he's fighting the guy who's supposed to be the next big thing. That's how CB Dalloway looked on that show. They show him tapping out Rampage, even though it's not like they were going hard. But he's a very talented guy, and nobody expected him to lose. For it to be Amir, and plus CB's kind of a douchebag. Not that I'm knocking him really, but I guess I am by calling him a douchebag. But Amir Sadollah is the opposite of a douchebag. He's a humble dude. The whole show, he's just being humble, fucking, and, likable. And he's like, that's what made it so cool, is the best good guy beats the best bad guy. And it was fucking amazing. That's like, kind of like the Miracle on Ice. The USA takes out the Russians, and that's the end. Nope, that's not the end. They have to move on and beat Finland in the finals. And that's kind of what happened with The Ultimate Fighter Season 7. Amir moves on after beating CB Dalloway. On the other side of the bracket, Jesse Taylor beats Tim Crador. And it's Jesse versus Amir. Turns out Jesse's an animal. He was going around, kicking shit around. There's a whole video. You can look it up. Fucking kicked out a window of a limousine and yada, yada, yada. He said, "I'm with the UFC." And Dana said, "No, you're not. This is my city," or whatever. So he fucking got pulled, and they have a rematch. CB Dalloway CB Dalloway fights Tim Crador on a special fight of The Ultimate Fighter. And Tim Crador loses. CB wins a unanimous decision. So CB goes and fights Amir Sadollah in the finals again. This time it takes a few minutes, maybe 2 minutes. Amir's already on his back, but he catches a beautiful armbar. CB taps, pretends he didn't, but he did tap. And Amir Sadollah wins The Ultimate Fighter. He goes 5-0. He beats guys with, I don't know their combined records. I know I just looked them up before, where Steve Burns was 5-0. Matt Brown was 6-7. Gerald Harris, I think, was like 7-2, 8-2. And CB Dalloway was 5-0. Of course, he had another 3 victories on the show prior to fighting Amir. But nevertheless, huge underdog in all these fights. A lot of them were huge upsets, because he was a huge underdog. It's kind of redundant. And Amir Sadollah had just about every fight was a comeback for him. It's one of the greatest streaks ever. It was the coolest thing to watch. If you have The Ultimate Fighter available for yourself, watch the show. I know it's boring watching a reality show. It seems like it could be. I enjoy it, but you know, UFC reality shows. But check out UFC The Ultimate Fighter Season 7. And man, it's one of my favorite seasons, but it's absolutely my favorite story as far as a fighter winning that show. Great, one of the greatest runs I've ever seen, and it'll never get enough respect because there weren't UFC titles involved and whatever the fuck, but it was still fucking awesome. And anytime it's brought up, anybody who's seen that or who saw that and witnessed what he did, it sticks with them. You could tell they remember that. It was man, it's hard to not respect an underdog and a comeback, and to have it just snowball and parlay it into each fight. Each one is better than the last, and then for it to end essentially with him beating CB Dalloway in that semifinals match, even though it ended in the finals, obviously. But like I said, the fucking, you know, when you found out he was good enough to beat CB, it was fucking amazing. Great television. So thank you for tuning into this. As always, this show is sponsored by Coke. Drink Coke, whatever the fuck. And I will make a video soon about UFC Fight Night, fucking whatever. Hill versus fucking Walker. All right. See you soon.